This recording will describe the questions and demonstrate the functionality associated with Screen 4.0, Sterilization in Place, SIP, in the Sterilization Process Validation QBR. Screen 4.1, General Information. Section 4.1 asks the user to list all sterilization in place, SIP, cycles that are used at the facility. The default screen for this section is the info screen, which details different views and also provides basic instructions for the use of this module. To add an SIP cycle item, click the Add New Item button. The first box of the new screen asks you to identify the SIP cycle ID. After entering the cycle ID, the next box asks for a description of the equipment that is sterilized using this cycle. If multiple pieces of equipment are sterilized using the same cycle parameters, you will create a separate SIP cycle item for each. The next box asks for a description of the locations within the equipment where the thermocouples and biological indicators are placed to monitor performance of the cycle. The last box asks for justification of these thermocouple and biological indicator locations, including the number of thermocouples and biological indicators used. As noted in the hint for this final box, this should include information to show that the monitoring locations for validation and routine production adequately monitor the hardest to sterilize locations within the equipment. Summary data from cycle development studies to support this justification may be provided in Module 3. All of these fields must be completed to continue. Once all fields have been completed, the user can click the Add New Item button to add another SIP cycle, if any. The same process is then repeated for each cycle. The blue arrows at the top of the screen can be used to switch between the entered cycles. A list of all entered cycles can be viewed by clicking the List button. The selected cycle can be deleted by clicking the Delete Item button. The user will be prompted to confirm that they wish to delete a cycle if they choose to do so. The user may also choose to delete all entered cycles by clicking the Delete All Item button. This action also requires confirmation. Entered cycles can be reordered here using the Move Item Up and Move Item Down buttons. The user can return to the text fields for the selected cycle by clicking the Detail button. Clicking the Info button returns the user to the initial instructional screen. Once all cycles have been entered, proceed to the next section by double-clicking on Section 411 in the navigation menu or by clicking the green Next arrow. Screen 411, Validation and Production Parameters. This section asks the user to provide a comparison of the SIP parameters employed during validation to those parameters employed during regular production activities. You can identify which SIP cycle you are currently describing by referring to the SIP cycle ID field at the top of the page. It will be the cycle that you most recently had selected in Section 4.1. In the provided fields, enter the values that correspond to the validation and production parameters for the current cycle. Note that once you have entered the parameters for a given cycle, you are able to save these entries for use in describing other cycles through the use of the databook feature. A completed cycle can be saved to the databook for future use. Useful information for the use of the databook can be viewed by clicking on the hint icon. A name for the data is provided by default, but you may also enter your own. Once you've entered a name for this cycle, click OK to save this information to the data book for the SIP section. Each cycle must be given a unique name. You will be notified that the data has been successfully saved. Once data have been saved to the data book, they may be retrieved for future use by reaccessing the data book. The data book interface allows the user to browse all previously saved SIP cycle parameters. This screen also allows for the editing of saved data book entries, as well as the deletion of saved data book entries. To apply the parameters from a saved data book entry to the current cycle being edited, choose Select while the relevant entry is highlighted. You should still confirm that the information copied from the data book is accurate once it's imported. Click on the next arrow to proceed to section 412, Biological Indicator. This section asks the user to provide information about the biological indicator used for this SIP cycle. You can again identify which SIP cycle you are currently describing by referring to the SIP cycle ID field at the top of the page. It will be the cycle that you most recently had selected in section 4.1. In the first field, enter the species of the biological indicator. In the next field, indicate whether this BI is a spore suspension or a spore strip. Next, indicate whether this BI is prepared in-house or purchased ready to use. Note that the required information is dependent upon the source of the indicator. Complete all remaining fields. All fields must be completed to continue. Note that once you've entered the information describing a given biological indicator, you are able to save these entries for use in describing other cycles through the use of the data book feature in a similar manner to its use in the previous section. Again, when retrieving data from a saved data book entry, you should confirm that information copied from the data book is accurate once it is imported, particularly since information regarding lot numbers, populations, and D values are not saved in the data book. Also note that COAs for all biological indicators described in this section should be included in Module 3. Click on the next arrow to proceed to section 413, Validation Run Results. This section asks the user to provide data from validation runs to demonstrate the successful validation of this cycle. You can again identify which SIP cycle you are currently describing by referring to the SIP cycle ID field at the top of the page. It will be the cycle that you most recently had selected in section 4.1. Fill in the first field with the acceptance criterion for the minimum F sub 0 for validation of the cycle. Fill in the second field with the acceptance criterion for the biological indicator for validation of this cycle. Once you've entered these acceptance criteria, you are able to save these entries for use in describing other cycles through use of the data book feature in a similar manner to its use in the previous sections. Again, you should confirm that information copied from the data book is accurate once it is imported. Once the acceptance criteria for your validation runs have been entered, the Run Results section asks the user to enter data from completed validation runs. CVM's expectations regarding what data are required to support full validation of an SIP cycle can be found by clicking on the hint icon. To add the results from a validation run, click the Add Result button. Enter the date the run was completed, the minimum F sub 0 achieved for the run, and the results for biological indicators for that run. Once entered, runs can be edited by clicking the Edit Selected Run Result button, or deleted by clicking the Delete Selected Run Result button. Once multiple runs have been entered, they can be selected by clicking and reordered within the display using the blue Move Run Result buttons. Note that run results are not saved in the data book and must be entered separately for each cycle described. To enter information for other SIP cycles, return to section 4.1, General Information, by double-clicking that section on the left navigation pane. In the SIP cycle file list, click on the next cycle for which you would like to complete sections 411 through 413. Once that cycle is selected, click on the green Next arrow. Remember to refer to the SIP cycle ID text field to confirm that you are editing the desired cycle. You can now enter information regarding the validation and production parameters, biological indicator, and validation run results for other SIP cycles in sections 411 through 413, just as you did for the first cycle. You may again enter values manually or import values from saved data book entries. Once you have completed sections 411 through 413 for all SIP cycles employed at this facility, proceed to section 4.2 Requalification, either by using the navigation arrows at the top of the screen or by double-clicking on section 4.2. This section asks users to provide a description of the requalification strategy used to support the SIP cycles described in section 4.1. This includes a description of the SIP cycles used, monitoring locations, and frequency of requalification. Click on the hint icon to obtain further information on CVM's expectations regarding minimum requirements for requalification of SIP cycles. Note that this section allows for the entry of tables and symbols, as well as editing of this section in a pop-out window, as well as advanced HTML-based editing.